the basics, the essence of God creating the whole world, but only a condensed version of it, and the rest will expand later. The creation account in the Bible is a highly sophisticated presentation designed to emphasize the majesty and the power and the wisdom of God, who is, in fact, the King of creation. Unmatched Old Testament scholar Bruce Waltke wrote this: His creation reveals His immeasurable power and might, His bewildering imagination and wisdom, His immortality and transcendence, ultimately leaving the finite mortal in mystery. These are big words for something that we're examining that is the biggest of truths. The first verse of the Bible is the foundational verse of the Bible. And it's no accident that God is the subject of the first sentence of the Bible. And this word God dominates the whole chapter. It catches the eye on every point of the page. The word God is used some 35 times in 35 verses. This passage, Genesis 1, and indeed the whole book of Genesis, is about God first. To read Genesis with any primary interest other than God is to misread it. Genesis chapter 1 summarizes the creation of the world and all things therein with stark simplicity. God meant for it to be easily understood. Over 400 years ago, the great Bible commentator Matthew Henry wrote, "The first verse of the Bible gives us a surer and better, a more satisfying and useful knowledge of the origin of the universe than all the volumes of the philosophers." And he topped that quote with the next one. Matthew Henry wrote, "The lively faith of humble Christians understands this matter better than the elevated fancy of the greatest wits." In other words, the least schooled, most ordinary Christian who understands and believes the first verse of the Bible has a greater eternal knowledge than all the men and women in the world with doctorate degrees who don't believe. Genesis 1:1 is the foundational verse of this foundational chapter. It tells of the primeval creation of the universe itself. It's the foundation of all foundations. And therefore, Genesis 1:1 is the most important verse of the Bible. It's the greatest miracle ever recorded. Genesis 1:1, by the way, undoubtedly contains the first words ever written. And because it is the opening statement of the world's most often printed book, then these words, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth," are the most widely read words ever written. Because most people at least start to read the Bible at some point. And therefore, most literate people have at least read these opening words in the scriptures, even if they never get any farther than that. And what a daring claim this initial verse makes. Have you ever considered it? You see, I've often said to our congregation that if a person can truly believe Genesis 1:1, then he or she will not find it difficult to believe anything else recorded in the Bible. The first verse of the Bible is the greatest miracle that's ever happened. The most difficult one that's ever been performed. That is, if God really created all things, then He controls all things, and He can do all things. Furthermore, this one short verse refutes all of mankind's false philosophies concerning the origin and the meaning of the world. I'll give you a short list. Genesis 1:1 refutes atheism because the universe was created by God. It refutes pantheism. Pantheism is the teaching that God is in all things. But it refutes pantheism because God is transcendent to what He created. He's outside of it. Genesis 1:1 refutes polytheism, more than one God, because one God created all things. It refutes materialism. Here's the definition of materialism: that matter constitutes the universe and that matter is eternal. Stuff is eternal. But Genesis 1:1 refutes materialism because now we know through it that matter had a beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God made stuff. It refutes dualism. Dualism is the doctrine that there are two independent divine beings, one good and one evil, and they are constantly competing with each other. But Genesis 1:1 refutes dualism because God was alone when he created. It refutes humanism because God, not man, is the ultimate reality. And finally, it refutes evolution because God created all things. What a verse Genesis 1:1 is. And indeed, all of these philosophies we just listed are just different ways of expressing the same unbelief. There are propositions of anti-creation philosophies that are kind of remarkably similar. In other words, these are ideas of different worldviews that reject creation. And each one of them proposes the same three ideas. Number one, that there is no personal transcendent God. Number two, that ultimate reality is to be found in the eternal cosmos itself. There was no created beginning according to these ideas. And number three, the development of the universe into its present form is contingent solely on the innate properties of its own components. Those who don't believe in creation believe that what's out there created itself. And the entire system could well be called the system of evolutionary atheistic humanism. And all of these propositions, all of these philosophies are arrayed in opposition to the great truth that is marvelously simple, the great truth that is understandable even to a child, and the great truth found in Genesis 1:1 that is inexhaustibly profound, that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Only in the Bible is it revealed that God created everything. All other ancient religious books, all other ancient religious philosophies and systems, as well as all the modern philosophies, begin not with God, but with pre-existing matter or pre-existing energy in some form. That's basic to understanding as we teach Genesis 1:1. That's all for now. I'll see you next time.